School of Medicine. And it's a pleasure to be here today with Rea Tajiri, filmmaker and professor of film at Temple University.
Thank you very much, Jason, and thank you to Miles Cohen and the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society, and for Penn, and for you for inviting me to be a part of this for Arts on the Mind. It's a very, I think, special space to really carve out time to talk about dementia and the impact of art, which is a topic that's very near and dear to me. So
let's dive in. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, you know, I'm of, and we've talked about this, the firm conviction that the arts aren't simply about entertainment, though they certainly can be entertaining, and but they're a means of connection and creating meaning. Mm-hmm. And I think this film is squarely in that space. So, you know, let's reflect a bit. I was thinking, you know, I'm a physician, and so people like your mother, Rose, are patients. Mm-hmm. And when I approach a patient, what I think about is the need to assess function and cognition. So function, in my word, means the ability to do daily tasks, travel someplace, get the menu, pick out what you want, or go to the store, buy the food, bring it home and cook it. Later on, you know, waking up in the morning, your morning routine. Of course, people with dementia caused by Alzheimer's have impairments in function. Mm-hmm. And also I measure cognition, you know, I give them words to memorize, I have them draw a clock, other things. And you know, that from a physician's perspective, function and cognition pretty much describe dementia, you know, disabling cognitive impairments. And by all standards, you know, your mother, as we meet her in this documentary, is really quite impaired. She needed help, it looks like, with bathing and dressing, etc. And her cognition, had I tested it, I think would probably have been very impaired. And yet, what I wanted to get at was there seemed to be something else there, and I thought we would talk about that.
Yeah.
And that was her mind was still there.
Yeah, that was the interesting conundrum, right? I think as my mother's dementia progressed was, you know, realizing, because I think like everybody, mostly when this first starts happening, you know, you're like, oh my God, this is terrifying.
Yeah,
you know?
she's so impaired.
Right.
She can't remember anything.
Right. You know, she can't drive, she can't do this. Oh my God, what are we going to do? But yet, when I would spend time with her, we would get into these very interesting and deep conversations that were very profound to me. And I would try to tell people, like, I'm having these very intense conversations with my mom, but my mom cannot drive, she can't cook dinner. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm worried about her, what's going to happen next. But yet, you know, this was really meaningful. Yeah. And that was important to share, and that was one of the reasons to make the film, because people would be like, oh my God, you know, and really go into this whole tragedy. Oh, this is, you know, it's hard. I'm not going to say it's not hard.
All disease is bad. Right. It's not like I can't wait to have cancer.
Right. Yeah. But I think in these situations, we're sort of faced with, you know, all these questions about deeper questions of life and existence and consciousness and mind, the mind, right?
So one of the core things that creatures who have a mind do is perceive whether other creatures have a mind. You know, and by creatures I use that deliberately, not just other humans, but other animals. You know, and dogs and horses. You know, they have a mind. Of course, it's a different mind than a human mind. And one of the core questions in mind perception that I think we ask from the philosopher Thomas Nagel is, what is it like to be? What is it like to be? His question was, what is it like to be a bat? Because of course you can't ask a bat, you have to sort of observe it, listen to what it says. So what do you think it was like to be Rose?
There's two funny answers. Well, there's two answers to that. One is, when you edit a film, you spend hours, you know, staring at somebody on the screen, and you're anticipating their gestures and their movements, because you're kind of internalizing their rhythms. Mm-hmm. So you really feel like you're embodying that person. And then sometimes, you know, you're editing a film about someone you don't know, and then you meet them, and it's very like weird because you sort of feel like you know them intimately. But in this case, I think like I felt like, you know, I had to, you know, I'm Rose's daughter, I was her caregiver, and then, you know, I'm sort of embodying her as a character in my film. But do I really know what it was like to be her? No. She remained a mystery to me. And I don't think I could. I only know what it's like to experience her, right, from you know, from the outside looking in.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I could take some guesses that, you know, she lived in a very kind of, you know, sort of non-linear world and had a very free kind of associative existence. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
So when we think about mind, we think about our ability to have experiences and have agency. So when we think about experiences, it's like having feelings of joy or happiness, sadness, the pleasure of listening to a song or tasting food. How do you think her disease affected her ability to have experiences?
Well, that's an interesting question too. One thing that I noticed, and I think a lot of people who are caregivers, if you're a caregiver, you notice that when you're taking care of someone who has dementia, they can be very present. And probably more, you know, I'm sitting here worrying about like, what is going on over there? You know, how is she going to react if I do? How am I going to get her into the car? All these things that you're, you know, constantly playing. And then she's very much in the moment and very able to just kind of like respond to things very immediately and in a very present way. Yeah.
What role, as we think about it, so this is the Arts on the Mind Festival, so let's go to what your role was supporting her mind. What role did the arts play in that? I have a, go ahead.
Yeah, well, as you can maybe see, one of the really fascinating things about my mom was that she was very interested in art. She was something that she just picked up on. She wasn't like, she didn't go to college, she wasn't trained at a university, but this was something that she just gravitated towards and encouraged all her children to go towards. So, you know, at one point I just realized, you know, we should go to museums together. I'm an artist. She enjoys this, and it was just, I started to see like her mind expand. You know, it was just, we would be together, and she would start to just, you know, tell me the things that she saw in the artwork in very deep ways. You know, I was just really surprised, and probably, you know, I mean, I'm used to having these discussions of, you know, critical responses and having been trained in, you know,
your faculty together.
Yeah, right, that too, and then, you know, conceptual art is very, you know, 10-hour conversations about.
But she would engage with the art.
And she would just engage, and it was just so, and it was like, oh, why am I wasting my time, you know, I mean, these critiques in class, you know, this is really incredible, right?
And which is fascinating, because back to my original remarks, again, had I then said, bring her to my office and tested her cognition and asked her to give function, I'd say this is a woman with severe stage dementia, period.
Right. And
yet here you are, and the interesting thing is you had to take her to the museum. It's not like she would say, hey, Rea, let's go to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. I think I'll be free at 1 o'clock, you know.
Right.
You know, you had to say, we're going to go. And if you hadn't decided that, she wouldn't have gone.
Right.
And what about music? She seemed belting out a song in the kitchen?
Yeah, so that's another really interesting thing, is that my mother forced us all to take piano lessons when we were growing up, and then said, I want to sit and listen to you. You know, I wish I could play like that. And all those years, my brother, actually, so what happened is when she was in an assisted living and my brother came to visit her, there's a piano there. She sat down one day and started playing, and he just like fell off the chair. He couldn't believe it. So all these years she was hiding that she had actually somehow, somewhere taken music lessons and actually could play. And it was just so funny, because here we are like playing these things over and over, and she had ability. And my brother also said she has really good pitch, and she can carry a tune, and she can sing these very complicated melodies. You know, he's a musician, right? So, so yeah, she had a lot of musical ability. And, you know, I think, you know, like how, I guess, I'm not going to explain this, you can explain it better than I can, but like there's that part of the brain that is activated, that kind of bypasses language, right? So that's what was happening with her. And it was also very lovely because I think, you know, her ability to interpret a song was also really very beautiful.
Despite her inability, say, to interpret if you told her about current events, for example, where she's befuddled, you know.
But, you know, I mean, there was obviously something in her experience that was able to express. And
did your brother, with the musician, play music with her?
Oh, yeah.
So that was the way they connected with music.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, you were singing to her there.
Then we started, I had to learn her songs. So then we kind of, you know, did these duets. Yeah.
I see. And what about creating an environment? I mean, we don't think of our as a creation, but it is. I mean, we choose to have furniture from IKEA or from you know, wherever, you know. And what did you all do to create an environment for her? I noticed at one point she was in a salon. It looked like.
Right. So you know, trying to consider how to make the film, and I thought at one point. It would be nice to actually take something from her life that she knew, like, you know, she was a beautician and she was talking a lot about being a beautician. So take something from her life and, you know, create an environment for her. She was also an avid gardener, although she forgot about gardening. She just completely, that went by the wayside, but she was a really avid gardener. So I thought, what if we combine these things and make an environment and see what happens, see if she responds to it. And then we brought her in, and then she just kind of, you know, it was really beautiful. She looked at, we had a crew in the room, and she looked at everybody and then, you know, acknowledged everybody by, you know, just kind of nodding and smiling. And then she just kind of began to sing this very tender song, which you see at the end, and it was very beautiful. I mean, it was just so delicate and tender, and just kind of like, you know, this is for you, like this, you know, just not you know, not at everybody. So
So what I'm hearing is, you know, again, we often, and for good reason, emphasize caregiving as work, and the work of caregiving is the activities of daily living, and, you know, time and task. That's what. But what I'm hearing is these efforts that involve, frankly, artistic engagement with the singing, the environment you created. So there was also storytelling going on too.
Yeah, that was fascinating because I played the film last week to some students who were from very different disciplines, so history, oh gosh, I forgot now. But when there was some history, computer science, and this thing kept coming up. They kept going, oh, Rose was an unreliable narrator. And I thought that was really, we talk about that a lot in film school, but it was funny to have it come up. And so I liked that, you know, addressing this because, you know, she's telling these stories. And I have to admit it, like oops, my microphone went out. Okay, so I admit that, did they just go?
I know you did.
Yeah, okay, so I admit that I was, as we were editing, I really wanted to say, what are the, you know, like I kind of know some of her life more than my siblings because I interviewed her a lot. So I knew that these connected to real events in her life. But then some of the things I really didn't understand what they were about. We looked them up, and they were sort of interesting what they revealed. She kept saying the Buddhists became the Christians. Well, it's actually during World War II, the government was surveilling religious leaders, and they were surveilling the Buddhist priests. So to avoid this kind of surveillance, they converted to Christianity. And it's very clever, right? So that's, you know, it's like, oh, but then it's sort of a joke because then, you know, like later on, Buddhism becomes very popular and a lot of people convert from Christianity to Buddhism, right? So
and she picked up on that.
Right,
and
she goes, the Hakujin, the white people, they don't know. So it's a joke, you know.
Yeah, and what I thought was interesting, what you were engaging in there was, I mean, there was a period of time in dementia care where it was all about reminiscence therapy.
Yeah.
Which Ann Basty and I like to call reminiscence torture, because what you do is you you essentially subject the person to a memory test. So tell me where you were born and whatnot. And actually, Chris Clark, my mentor, taught me that one great way to diagnose a patient was to task them to tell you their life narrative. Because I'll never forget the patient who said to me, and so when was your child born? He says, well, if you told me when I got married to my wife, it was 9 months right after that, okay? And he was really pissed off. Anyway, but what she was doing was this unprompted storytelling. Yeah. I'm going to tell you the story, and then you're sort of asking her, and letting her develop the story, which is really very different than reminiscence therapy, which is, as I said.
Well, what's interesting is that, so she knew she was being filmed, because then she would start to perform, and suddenly the stories would come out. She wasn't just I didn't even ask her, I was just hanging out with her, and she just decided to become very performative because she saw the guy, our camera.
So she sort of consented to being filmed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because people would question me, and I'm like, well, she was performing in essence. She became very.
And she knew you were a filmmaker. Yeah.
She knew I was a filmmaker, right? And her husband was a photographer, and she was.
So that adds another medium to our. So we've been talking about music,
the art.
Oh, we're both playing.
We're talking about the arts and engagement with her, like going to the museum. We've talked about story, and we've also talked about perhaps the role of, for those who are put them on the stage or otherwise in a camera, and maybe that would helps them to open up and share, tell experiences, etc., and create meaning. So and there was certainly meaning going on there between you and she, where she was talking about this history of the Buddhists converting to Christianity in order to keep the feds off their back. Dream logic, it's this opening overall, almost sort of conceptual model of what you then give us the wisdom of, the 6 wisdoms or so that are recounted there, come out of this conceptual model of dream logic. But as you pointed out to me, you've been criticized that dream logic sounds absurd because dreams don't seem to be terribly logical. I don't know where they come from, and so I wondered if you could sort of comment on the sort of inherent contradiction in and yet wisdom in that idea of dream logic. Mm-hmm. I'll give you the mic.
Right. So the student who asked me that, I said, the most profound things in life come from the contradictions, right? That's where we really learn things. The clashes, because they were like, that doesn't make any sense. Dreams are illogical. So, so the only way I could describe, so in that scene, it's in the beginning, I use that term, to introduce that term, but I had come home from a trip and my mom was kind of literally inside her dream telling me what was happening. And it was a dream where she said, Hugh Hefner gave me a grant to mine diamonds in the desert. And so I explained this to this student. I said, that's what she told me, right? I said, I know what that meant. And if I tell it to you, you're like, what? But to me, it connected to all these different things in her life. And I had told her at one point, I got a grant to make a film. She said, I wish someone would give me a grant just for being who I am. I just wanted a grant. So I'm like, okay.
It's called long-term care services and support.
Right. Okay. So she got a grant, yeah. And then my father worked for Hugh Hefner, and she didn't like him. But in her dream, Hugh gave her money to go out and get diamonds, something very precious and rare in the desert. I was in the desert. So I don't know. There was something to me about somehow being given something from someone who she didn't like, who had dismissed her. Yeah. So yeah.
I think that one thing I've learned is in my clinical practice is to embrace the contradictions, and out of it the wisdom that comes from it. With particularly related dementia, I often tell my caregivers and patients a phrase that actually was I credit to the physician and poet John Keats, which is to accept that there's an aspect of life which is pleasant pain. And how to cultivate the feel of not to feel it, the feeling of not to feel it. And I think dream logic fits into that sort of contradictory, and yet when you put it together, logical statement. It occurred to me as I've seen this film now several times that her experiences in World War II revealed lots of dream illogics or nightmare logics, namely that she goes from a concentration camp to then go meet and marry her husband, who's fighting in the army, but it's in a unit that is only for individuals who are of Japanese ancestry in
region of America where where based on your race you're not allowed to do certain things. I mean, talk about what logic is that? Crazy. I do want to open it up to the audience for questions, and then we'll move on. Wow.
Put a new battery in, yeah. Terry Casey, by the way, if you don't know. But while you all think of questions and raise your hands, get ready to. This film's been out now for about how long?
2 years.
2 years, and I'm curious just what's been, and thank you for doing it. It was very brave to do, and I'm glad you showed the truth, her in her disability. I think it's important for people to see that, and yet, as I see it, the ability to make that connection, even in her very advanced stages, maybe severe stage dementia, untestable is what my colleagues and I, at least I used to say, they're untestable, and that meant they weren't very interesting. That's what we would say, and that's just what we did then. But how have people received the film? What's been the kind of responses?
I think pretty.
We'll hear some from this group.
Okay, I think it's been received well, and I think there's some festivals who've told me that they feel that the issue of consent came up and they wouldn't screen it. So
Wow.
yeah, but
Nice.
that's it's so yeah, it's and but so I feel like consent is it's a very I don't think it's very. It's not like you sign a piece of paper, I've given consent. Now it's all everything you said now from here on is okay. It doesn't work that way, right? It's a very it's complicated. But it's on PBS. There's a shorter version that was screened on PBS, and it's on the POV series. If you have Passport, the free streaming period is over, but you can go on and look at it if you have the membership, and I think something, you pay, what is it, $9.99 or something for 1 month, and then you cancel it if you want to.
So please, I want to give people the opportunity to ask questions. Go ahead.
I can speak loud. I don't have a question, but I really want to commend
Or
you.
comments, yes.
Yeah, I really want to commend you. I have taken care of my husband and my mother, who have both had dementia and very serious illnesses. But your gentleness and your courage, and your sister and brother in addition, I love your mother. I mean, when she sang, I wanted to be with her. And I just thank you so much for being an example to those of us who will in the future likely have to do, again, things like this. So thank you, and for doing all the work. I can't imagine what that was like for you, so thank you.
I think I made it because I also wanted to be able to have conversations publicly and for us to reconceptualize what it means to care for somebody and to open up that, dementia isn't just this one note, right? And it shouldn't be something that people hide from, yeah.
I'm of the view that this.
And Macy and I talked. It's films like this that every CNA, long-term care worker, physician in the field should watch as part of their training. Yeah. Go ahead. Soccer voice.
Yeah. Well, I don't need. I think I don't need the mic. Let's see. I was struck by the gentleness throughout the film. And I was wondering, because I've had some experiences with this, that there's also an anger that shows up in patients like this, and in the caregivers, of course.
Yeah.
But how do you, and Dylan Thomas, but how do you, how did you deal with it, or did you see it in this set of experiences?
Yeah. So if you want to talk about certain parts of consent. So my mother actually did have a really difficult side where she could be quite violent. And it was scary because she could go from like the lovely,
That was a doctor's office, we saw it.
yeah, that wasn't even everything. She could be really, really difficult. We left that in there because I did want to also show that side of dementia. But yeah, it was hard, and I think some of it is just well, for me, this is how I dealt with it, was to just kind of to ride it like you ride if you're surfing, you have to just ride that. It's a wave, it's part of it. And not to personalize it, as hard as that is, because sometimes it's your own mother yelling at you, or for something that could be very personal, but just trying to also not internalize it in that way and to write it out.
Please, okay.
Right, I wonder how many of those psychic conversations or those psychic cell phone calls that you had gave you pause as to whether you were missing something, because performative or not, her cueing, the cues and the pace of the conversation was just too natural. It was as if she really was talking to someone, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I think she was talking, if you talk to hospice workers, they will tell you that they always see their patients talking to people who are not there in the room. So I believed it. They were kind of interesting conversations. A lot of people talk about the brown rice, like, oh, after I saw your film, I converted to brown rice.
Also, there were moments where, with you and with others, she had real connection, despite periods where she was really having profound troubles with communication. Is that the case? Periods of lucidity?
Yeah, she did have, and I think this is true of people with dementia. They can somehow shockingly, suddenly just snap into lucidity, and you're like, oh, okay, and then,
And we've done research in this. We have
And what we found is just that. And personally and professionally, it's been one of the most important projects we did, funded by the National Institute of Aging, which was to realize that these episodes of lucidity, as brief as they may be, as intermittent, are tremendously meaningful. And most every caregiver said it's what sustained the work of caregiving, because there was this ability to make this connection with the individual, and the conviction that there still is some mind there. It's just harder to perceive sometimes, harder to know what it is like to be. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious what you think about the sort of psychic aspect. You've probably heard this, right? For other people, right?
We used to just dismiss it. I would just say, oh, that's just whatever. And so they would, and if you don't ask about it, they wouldn't tell. And now I ask about it. Do you ever have moments where you have unexpected connection or communication? Most every caregiver says, oh yeah, no, and then they'll tell you these stories. And when it's lost or becomes more intermittent, it really is devastating, because I don't understand the neuroscience behind it, but it's telling us something quite fascinating. Because how is it that a brain that, I'm making up numbers, 75% of the time is having profound troubles with expression, and then all of a sudden can engage in a level of engagement, communication, etc., that subverts everything you've just witnessed. So, and we have not figured that out, and it's telling us something. That's one mystery. I think the other insight that we get from our work, and your film shows it, is how much all of our minds are extended into the world. They're not in the brain. They're created by and sustained by the world around them. If your mind is damaged by Alzheimer's, it really is extended into the world, and supported. It's almost like the world becomes like life support for the brain to keep the mind going. And you were clearly showing that with all the work that you and your brothers and sister were doing to bring her out and make her be Rose. Yeah. Others, hand popped right up.
How did your mother's dementia affect how you structured the film?
How did your mother's dementia affect how you structured the film? So that was how I structured the film, was I tried to mimic kind of like what it was like to spend a day with her. She would be like in 1 year, go back in time, come forward, it would be kind of going back into these different time periods. And so I also thought about a structure that would mimic that, that would kind of be in like, whatever, 1942, and then we're back in 2000 and whatever. She would do, And the other thing, structuring device, was to base it on these five wisdoms that I came up with.
Yep.
Walking in a filmmaker's shoe and having this story being almost as much about yourself as it is about your mom. Do you find a need to relinquish editorial choices, and if so, how difficult?
It is really difficult. I'm trying to think. I worked, in the last bit. I couldn't really finish the film. I have to be honest. It was so damn hard. I had two other editors, and the third one was the one that we really clicked. And she would tell me things that other people would tell me what was important. Like the fighting scene in the doctor, I wasn't sure if that should go in, and they said, well, actually, it's actually a good balance. And the scene at the end where it's like, who's the mama, da, 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 da. And I thought, oh, that's just so, I don't know. And then I said, oh, no, that's really important. So that stayed in. You just kind of, I guess the other thing I would say to I feel is that in a way the film, yes, I'm in the film, and of course that's material you're all seeing from my life, but in a way it's really not me. It's like a character, and it's a story about my life, but it's not really, who I am. I don't know. It's a little weird to say that, but I'm trying to also make it so that's for other people, that it becomes something that other people can enter and relate to and find meaning in. Yeah. Film goes from, I think the moving footage is probably 89 is the earliest moving footage, and then there's slides from the 60s, there's photos from the 40s all the way back down to the 20s and 30s.
But at the time that we see her.
Oh, the time that you're seeing her?
4 years, 5 years?
So there's the footage from 1989 where we're in the backyard. She's in a car in around 1999, and the rest of it is something between 2012 and 2014. Yeah. And then, did you have your hand up, Ming? Yeah.
It looks like you just.
I'm sorry, I was Ming, right?
Yeah, it's so beautiful. This is such a beautiful film.
Thank you.
It's a film about you and your mother, but also your family, and it's such a profound film about an Asian American family across generations.
Yes.
And I was also wondering, given all of the amazing work you've done with family and trauma and the camps from Strawberry Fields to History and Memory and on, if in the process of making this film and getting to know your mother in this different way, the Rose Noda and then meets Rea Tajiri way, if you felt that the dementia brought out different aspects of her ability to relate to or not to relay history about the camps. And
Yes.
past, because that's something that for so many of us with parents and who've
Mhm.
experienced war and diaspora, it's something that's very difficult
Yes.
to talk about that people don't want to talk about.
Right.
And I'm just curious to know if how
Yeah.
that shifted or changed as
It did. And that's why I put it in the film. It definitely did. My mom would not talk about camp. In my earlier film from 91, she wouldn't talk about it. And I didn't understand it. And now we have this like, of course, because she had experienced trauma and it was very suppressed. But towards the end of her life, suddenly I'm getting these stories, and I had to kind of reconstruct a narration for this one long story where she told me about riding the train from camp to go to Hattiesburg to meet my father. And it was this one part of her dementia when she was still pretty communicative, maybe in the mid-2000s. She kept telling me the story over and over and over and over and over. And I was like, I have never heard this story, now I can't stop hearing it, But it was obviously she was processing something that she could finally say. And then the other thing that was so fascinating was in their assisted living, I got pulled over by the executive director. He said, we have this doctor that comes in and he's telling me that your mother said she was in a camp and that she thinks he's in the FBI. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's really fascinating, because of course, you know, she feel like, my big worry was I have, you know, re-traumatized my mother by, against her will, putting her in assisted living, and she was sometimes going back to, and I think that there probably were moments in camp where you would be, you know, questioned by the, you know, these different camp officials that would come in, right? So I think there was a lot there, you know, yeah, definitely.
We're gonna
Adjourn down to a reception, and where you can have time to continue questioning with Rea. I want to just simply conclude with an overarching point that I began at the beginning. I'll say it at the end, just to reiterate it. You know, in the last several months, we've been prescribing now treatments for Alzheimer's that target amyloid. There are some patients, just a few, are capable of taking them for a variety of reasons. We have great hope that we're going to develop better treatments, that, you know, reaching the stage that you documented your mother in will not be one that people arrive at. But I think we have great treatments for cancer and heart disease, and yet people still die of cancer and heart disease. And I think that'll be the case for these diseases. And the point I'm getting at is one of hope, which is that I think what your film shows, what the festival has been trying to convey, is that there are ways that we can make meaning and learn how to live with these diseases. And that one of the key mechanisms of that is the role of the arts. And your film adds that as its own artwork to help educate us in that. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah,
okay, let's head down to the reception. Thank you.